there was definitely this, I guess you could call it a come to Jesus moment for me, where I was like, oh my God, this is for real, or at least some part of it. And then the question becomes how much and what is real and what remains cultural, I guess. So I run, for the audience, I run the Alt Propulsion Conference, which has kind of inherited the legacy. Actually, I just did a poster series the other day. It's inherited the legacy of like 6 major conferences that came before it, going back 20 or 30 years, with hundreds of PhD physicists and engineers who have contributed. And so in terms of UAP or UFO propulsion, I haven't seen anything that humans have developed that could explain it, not even ballpark close. And one of the things that I've been told, I guess, coming down from high, is that the Defense Department doesn't know really any more than the average person. Now there's this question of whether or not people believe that, right? Because there are so many conspiracy theories out there. But to me, I don't see anything from this world that could perform like that. And that, to me, says that it's not from this world, basically.
Yeah. The following is my conversation with Tim Ventura. Tim is a futurist, tech executive, and strategic advisor and media influencer, runs his own podcast, which I follow, aptly titled Tim Ventura Interviews, with fascinating guests, including 2 of my favorite episodes with Gary McKinnon and Ryan Graves. Tim is also the co-founder and moderator of APEC, an alternative propulsion engineering conference where he brings together subjects and heavy hitters from the science, tech, and engineering world. A fascinating guy with a deep interest in alternative propulsion and the UAP mystery. So, the following is my conversation with Tim Ventura.
Hey, neighbor.
Hey, Tim, how are you?
Doing well.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. I mean,
but...
you kind of, I've got kind of studio envy, I have to be honest.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. I've got the TVs, but I'm not going to turn them on. It's Halloween today, right? So I've got a kid I'm shuffling a kid around and I got to pick up some candy and, and don't tell anybody, but I actually already started Christmas shopping. So.
Nice. Nice. I've got a slightly different problem in that my studio, if you want to call it that, my study is very close to the front of the house, and so if they come along to knock on the door, the dogs are going to go crazy. So I'm going to have the finger near the mute button. But
oh, okay,
just in case.
Well, this studio kind of, I don't know, it evolved, right? It was, I like the problem, the other room that I was in had horrible, I mean, just the worst echo, right? Like it focused the sound on the mic. And so I was like, okay, I got to use another room. And I was like, okay, I can do that and I'll soundproof it. And then I got the soundproofing done and I was like, okay, so I have to set the TVs like this and I have to do this and this and this and and then it evolved. And so it just kind of ended up where it was. But so I'll do that for a while and then who knows, maybe go back to something else.
No, it looks good. Looks good. I'm impressed. If it's okay with you, I just kind of want to jump in back at the start, really, and obviously the subject I'm most interested in, but perhaps we'll get onto some other bits and pieces later. I'm interested in where you first kind of got into or got an interest in the subject of UFOs, UAPs, and I know that you've interviewed lots of people, and I've seen you around online talking about the subject of UAP, but I'm kind of keen to know what first piqued your interest in the subject.
Well, so this goes back for me to 2002. I started a website called American Anti-Gravity, and it goes back even further than that. I'm a tech guy, and so I love technology and innovation. I grew up reading sci-fi, the whole 9 yards. And in American Anti-Gravity, basically, I got involved with these little devices called lifters that took off and flew, with no moving parts. And just through, hard work, sheer luck, and community effort, right, it became kind of the focus for the media. And so it started from there, and it's kind of a short jump from that to the UFO topic. These are And the way that I like to think of it is, all of us are part of these little micro communities. That's the best way to describe it. And they're really intersectional. I mean, they overlap, right? And so people with a focus in UFOs are obviously interested in how they fly and vice versa, and all sorts of stuff. And so you've got, you know, basically all these little overlapping groups of people. And so UFOs was pretty close to the gravity part. I was exposed to a lot of it. I know, most, if not all, of the major players there. Um, so going back, 20 something years now, right? And I've always had kind of an interesting approach to it. I mean, I for some reason, I guess, um, I've never been a diehard UFO person, and especially in terms of abductions, there's so much psychological reason to explain that in terms of night terrors and sleep paralysis and things like that, that I was always really on the fence. And for me, that changed in 2017. 2017, I was actually doing, I just gone into regular tech reporting. I was, we're doing stories about drones and stuff like that. This was a passion project after hours. I was working in software during the day and marketing, and I was like, you know what? I want to do something at night. I'll write. And so my defense contacts started telling me, hey, this UAP thing is starting to make headlines. And at the time, I dismissed it. I was like, you know what? It comes and it goes. I was like, we'll ignore it. And these are like real credible defense people. And they're like, no, Tim, pay attention to this. This is for real. And I'm like, okay. So that was obviously the Nimitz story. And that's kind of how I got into it. And then fell back down the rabbit hole, I guess, like we all do at some point. So I hope that answers the question in terms of how I got kind of involved. But
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are saying that they have this kind of interest, this kind of at the back of their head, this kind of general interest from perhaps from childhood and films and movies, and then 2017 comes along, and New York, is it New York Post, I think it was, and Washington Post, New York Post, I forget, but the big piece, and the release of the footage, all of a sudden, hang on a minute, this might not be science fiction, this might be something else.
yeah, it's strange. And it's I think it's mind blowing. And I think, for me at least, when you stop and really think about it, that's the point where it's like, oh my God, you know. And I mean, sorry, and I know I'm kind of rambling, but like, all of us have been exposed to 70, 75 years of cultural stuff, right? Like Independence Day, the movie, would be probably the best one, where the whole legend. And so we've all grown up seeing bits and pieces of this, and many of us have read Whitley Strieber's Communion, and seen things about crop circles on TV and ancient aliens and all that stuff. So there's this massive cultural bulk, but at least for me, it's always been kind of remote, right? Like, okay, it's on TV, it's not necessarily real. uh and so there was definitely this I guess you could call it a come to Jesus moment for me, where I was like, oh my God, this is for real, or at least some part of it. And then the question becomes, how much and what is real, and what remains cultural, I guess.
Absolutely, it kind of challenges our perception of who we are, science, history. It's hard to get your head around, and I think for a lot of people, they try to just not think about it because it's just too difficult to think about. I think for a lot of people that
Yeah.
aren't in the subject, that aren't sort of fascinated by it, but I think that's changing. I think people are kind of moving
I
in
there
that
was
direction.
this there was this movie about UFOs with Martin Sheen, and he played the Fox Mulder CIA type guy at the end. And it was about Jesse Marcel goes back to a reunion, and people tease him. So I remember at the end of the movie, this came out in the 90s, this very elderly Marcel walks into this hangar looking at this old B-29 that's been restored, and there's the CIA guy in his suit, right? and the guy, he walks up to him and he says, you know, it's all real. Everything that you experienced was real. And Marcel, again, he's super elderly. He looks at me, says, why can't you just admit it and give me what I need emotionally? And the Sheen's character looks at him, and the line that he said stuck with me. And he said, America is the land of the 30-year mortgage. He said, Americans need to go to bed at night and wake up the next morning knowing that the world hasn't changed. And I was like, man, there's something to that makes sense. I'm not saying it's right, but it makes sense.
Have you managed to narrow down your opinion or your kind of belief on what they represent, what the UAP is, what does it represent? I know that it's a very broad question, but have you kind of got a direction that you're kind of going in, that you think this is what they are?
From
So in terms of, sorry, go on.
Yeah. Well, from my interviews, part of it is I've been hit by like many different competing narratives, right? And so, and I think we all have, you know. To me, kind of the most logical was, it seems like the Nimitz story and all the associated stuff, Ryan Graves and all of that all kind of had, it was a narrative that was, it kind of fit together and it made sense, and it all kind of reinforced, you know, and it was all kind of moving forward until David Grush started speaking this summer. And then that threw a tremendous monkey wrench into things. I'm not sure what that represents. And again, I mean, I've been blessed a little bit, you know, and again, I don't name names, but I have a lot of defense contacts. And one of the things that I've been told, I guess, you know, coming down from high, is that the Defense Department doesn't know really any more than the average person, you know. Now, there's this question of whether or not people believe that, right? Because there's so many conspiracy theories out there. But you know, when you see these meetings on TV where the DoD people, you know, look completely mystified, some of that I think is showmanship, because again, they have all this cultural experience, right? Like where they're like, well, it could possibly be this and it could possibly be that. And it's like, dude, you've seen the movies, you know, like you've seen the X-Files. You can't exist on our planet without being part of that culture. But then on the other hand, it's like, do they know more than the average person? I'm not sure. I haven't seen any smoking gun evidence. And I know a couple of people with very high level access who looked into that, and one of them came back to me, and he got as deep as it may be possible to get, and he said they don't have any information the average guy in the street doesn't. Okay, well, so that runs very much counter to what David Grush is saying. And then there's this whole confusion about where did he get his information, and it becomes this whole he said she said thing again, right?
Yeah. What do you make of the shift in narrative from the government, from not really talking about it, this being a bit of a joke piece, to now, you know, this is a threat to aviation potentially, and this is real. In the UK where I am, it's there's not a lot in the media, hardly anything, to be honest, and we're kind of a few days behind the American media, if at all, most of the time. Whereas a lot of my content is online, and it is American based, because that's where it's kind of broadcast, and that's where, you know, the subject is most talked about. But I have noticed that narrative change very recently, you know, obviously around David Grush and more so with the congressional hearing and things like that. But I mean, I'm keen to know your sort of perspective on why there's been a narrative change from the government, if you think there has.
You know, I think part of it just reflects a cultural change. And I think there are a couple of cultural changes going on. You've had a lot of change within the defense community, right? Around the .com era, a lot of your Cold War era folks, where this was kind of part of their culture, you know, for better or worse, they either believed or they hated it. a lot of them retired off and left. And so it's been a decade or two where we've had more IT focused, computer focused people. And for them, I think a lot of these narratives are a little bit newer, and they're looking at it with fresh eyes, and that could also be part of the reason why this information, it seems like something like this would be too big to get lost. But then at the same time, if Grush is right and it was shuffled off to defense contractors, maybe when some of these folks retired off, they literally just took it with them.
Yeah.
That's something that I've wondered about. So I think part of it is that. The other part is it's been enough time since the Cold War ended, and enough time since Roswell. It's been enough time since those events happened that I think there's that immediacy, that pressure of, this is really dangerous. We have to keep this a secret, whether or not people believe, I think that pressure has subsided and people are able to talk about it more openly. It's that's kind of the impression that I get. This is definitely a long-term cultural theme, and I think I think it will continue to be. And one of the reasons is, again, playing the devil's advocate, right? And this is something that the skeptics don't like to admit, but people are always going to look up and see things they don't recognize in the sky. That's just the way things are, right? They'll misinterpret planets, aircraft landing lights, the whole 9 yards. You're always going to have UFO reports. And the other part is, I think that UFOs and aliens answer a need, the same need that we used to chalk up to like fairies and gremlins and goblins and things like that, right? It's this larger world, the unseen world that's around us. And as humans, we're storytellers. And that's a story that resonates in today's technologically advanced society, right? Like if I go out and say, oh, I saw a fairy outside, people are going to laugh at me. But if I say, well, I saw a UFO alien, people are like, well, okay, yeah, other planets. We know there are other planets out there. We suspect there's life, maybe it could get here. Yeah, that's more plausible. It resonates a little bit better. So I think that this is something that, it answers basic needs. It will continue. It will probably grow over time. And so I think that's a large part of it, is just, it's the sea level is rising, I guess. It's the rising tide that lifts all ships. And I think that the government is trying to address that, and then there are all sorts of questions about how much did they know, how honest are they being, and how much did they really want to address it in public, right? Because Arrow has been accused of basically trying to make it somebody else's problem. And I tend to think that they're trying to do the best they can, although they're definitely a little bit obtuse about it, right? So
The interesting sort of side position, I guess, is that this is technology that the US government's developed or developing, and actually isn't extraterrestrial or interdimensional or whatever the other sort of varying views are, and that this is technology that's kept under wraps. They've been working on it for quite a long time, and we're going to see a new development. So the kind of argument or the example often given is something like the stealth bomber. There were sightings at the time of triangles in the sky, and all of a sudden there's a stealth bomber. And I guess when we look at it, we think, well, that's 30-ish years ago. That's a long time ago. What have they been developing since then? And could this be the new big thing that we all of a sudden hear about? And I guess I know that you're a futurist, and you invest in tech startups and with that kind of futurist mindset. What do you think? So if this could be, or if this is a advanced technology, propulsion type technology, do you think, and I know that you're kind of in this field at the moment, do you think that could have a big impact on us, or do you think it's, my concern is that it could just be something that's passed off to private corporations and for the war machine and used in war and combat, and not necessarily something that we're going to have an immediate impact to our lives and kind of household technology and and things like that. I don't know, because we're speculating on what the technology is, so it's hard to say. But do you have any kind of opinion on what it could represent, I guess, for us as a consumer? Anything like that? I mean, I rambled on a bit with that question, but I guess it's a difficult question because we don't know what it is to then know how it could benefit us. But I guess if it's an alternative propulsion, a new means of propulsion, then that could be quite significant for humanity, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I run, for the audience, I run the Alt Propulsion Conference, which has kind of inherited the legacy. Actually, I just did a poster series the other day. It's inherited the legacy of like 6 major conferences that came before it, going back 20 or 30 years, with hundreds of PhD physicists and engineers who have contributed. And so in terms of UAP or UFO propulsion, I haven't seen anything that humans have developed that could explain it, not even ballpark close. The best example that I've heard, I had a friend many years ago now, who flew aircraft out at Area 51. And of course, I had to ask him, okay, well, what do you have out there? Right. And he's like, Tim, he's like, it's classified. I can't tell you, but he's like, you could guess what we have and you'd be right. And I said, okay, well, I'd guess that you're probably testing stuff like the B-2 bomber and drones and predators. Right. And he's like, there you go. So, human technology is, again, it's linear and it comes from a technology base, right? And so we have a pretty good idea what's being developed by just looking at it. Like, I see on your shelf up there in the very top, I see what looks like Elon Musk's Starship.
Yes.
That's where we're at right now, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an evolutionary development, right? And so, like, in terms of the alt propulsion stuff, in terms of the conference, there's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of experiments. There's a lot of research. There's some really brilliant ideas. In that conference, we have a ton of people who are into UAP, UFOs, and people doing reverse engineering. So it's all there. But they don't have anything even remotely close to what's already been flying around. And then the other part is it's been flying around for 75 something years, right? So you have to turn that clock back. But Dr. Kevin Newth had talked about, like, the performance characteristics of UAP. Anything inside of those craft, unless you had some kind of like inertial nullification, would be destroyed. The airframe, if we used any kind of conventional airframe, it would be destroyed from those kind of maneuvers. The speeds that they move, the computer systems required to control them are beyond anything that we have. So human technology just isn't there. And so I think that, and this kind of goes to your earlier question, when you hear like the US government talk about, well, maybe it's China, maybe it's Russia, maybe it's some other government, right? And I think this will also apply to the Black projects world within the US. My response is, that's something that they use as kind of I think it obfuscates it. I think they put that out there so they don't have to say in public what everybody kind of knows it is, right? I mean, but to me, I don't see anything from this world that could perform like that. And that, to me, says that it's not from this world, basically.
Yeah. And that's the enigma. That's the mind twister, isn't it? That this is, you try to put a conventional twist on it, but it's just, you haven't got that missing piece. Well, how could it be? Well, surely it's not extraterrestrial. It must be, government tech, but then it seems impossible. And the more people that you speak to who have got, who work in engineering and science, and they've got no answer for it, which then takes you back to the other, well, this must be something else, and as you say, let's go back 70, 75 years. Well, surely not 70, 75 years ago. We certainly haven't got anything like that. And I know that you have some involvement with, and I know we're hopefully I'll be talking to Mark from Falcon
Yeah.
Space later in the week. But you have some involvement with that as well. And what's your involvement with those guys? Because that's fascinating.
Well, so Mark is the co-founder of the Alt Propulsion Conference, and they had gone to him and a couple of friends had gone to the Estes Park conference that Dr. James Woodward went to, and this was during the pandemic, and it was a smaller event, right? And they saw the potential for using Zoom, and so he ended up on my doorstep, right? Because I'd done a lot of work in this area, and he said, "I want you to moderate this." And and at the time, this may sound silly, but this was like, was it November 2020, October 2020, and this was dark times in the pandemic. And at first, I was like, "No, I can't." And then I gave it some thought, and I was like, "You know what? We're all gonna die anyways. Why not?" And as it turns out, we didn't die, so we just kind of kept doing it. But we've done 50 something of those now. Mark runs Falcon Space, and actually, he has one of the best ideas that I have seen in a very, very long time. He is looking at dynamic nuclear orientation. It's based on the work of Frederick and David Alzafon, and basically it's trying to align the spins of atoms on a nuclear scale and using atomic precession, as well as trying to create kind of macroscopic quantum effects. So what he's doing is actually really brilliant work. It's also like really in depth. I see him all the time. He's in his lab, he's testing stuff, he's got frequency generators going and all. So it's very granular, but
Yeah.
it's exciting. It's exciting, and I'm probably his number one fan. It's, again, as someone who studied a lot of different areas in this, I've seen so many different ideas come and go where it's like, okay, that sounds like it would work, but it won't for this reason or that reason, right? And his is probably one of the top 5 where I would say, you know what, if I was going to sit down and do this right now, that would be one of the ones I would do. So I think he's got a real shot at it. And I think that there are also a bunch of spin-off technologies as well. So even if it doesn't go all the way to gravity control, I think that he could use that for new types of quantum effects, new types of materials processing, the whole 9 yards. So I'm a big fan of what Mark is doing. He is very, very intelligent. He's a brilliant person, and he's very good with hands-on stuff.
Yeah, fascinating. I look forward to that conversation. I mean, it's fascinating just looking into, doing a bit of research online into those guys in the lab, and wow. I mean, mind blowing, for my sort of reptilian brain, my monkey brain.
Yeah,
It was fascinating
it's
stuff.
exciting. It's exciting to see this. It reminds me of the early days of aviation, and people were building all sorts of stuff. And so one of the challenges that I see is trying to integrate these two communities, right? And one of them are the PhD physicists who are not hands-on. They're very mathematically oriented, and they're doing great work, but it's all very cerebral. Trying to integrate them with the hands-on people who are kind of like, okay, well, the math is good, but how do we actually put this stuff together? And these are kind of two different cultures. They don't always integrate well. And one of the things that we've tried to do with alt propulsion is bring them together, which is kind of a challenge, but overall, I'm really pleased with it. So.
How are you? So you're working on your conferences at the moment, and how do people get hold of that? I mean, is that virtual? How would people sort of find that and be involved and listen in?
Yeah. Well, so basically the two big kind of endeavors that I'm doing right now are I do the Tim Ventura interviews, right? And again, I have my link tree, or people can go to timventura.com. It's a pretty straightforward website. That is an interview series. It is not all UAP. It's all over the place. I try and cover all sorts of topics in futurism. So I'm doing that. And then Alt Propulsion is just altpropulsion.com. And I would say for anybody who is interested in that, I would urge them to register and sign up. We have a mailing list. We don't share it. It's not public. It goes into a secure MailChimp account. And we just use that. We send out an update every time we do an event. Right now we're doing two different types of events. We have what we call the open mic, which is kind of a free for all. And that's how the conference started. So that's a lot of fun. It's all comers, whoever shows up. If you have an idea, if it works, if it's not too far off topic, we let people get involved. And that's all Zoom based. And then we've also gone to StreamYard for structured webinars where we plan those out in advance. So with StreamYard, basically we alternate. It's once a month for each. They're 2 weeks spread apart. And that lets us try and canvas kind of both approaches. There are some things where the free-for-all approach doesn't work so well. There are other things where the webinar is a little bit, too stuffy. So
good luck with that. Look, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I genuinely watch your podcast, and I am a fan, and keep up the great work. And some of the guests, they're incredible. I mean, just to touch on one of them, Gary McKinnon. Wow, that was mind blowing. Listening to that podcast with Gary, it was.
No, yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate your letting me talk. One of the areas, and I'd be happy if at some point in the future, if you want to have me back on. One of the areas that I have been really pushing forward into lately is trying to connect UAP to space science, because I feel I just have this feeling like that's the next step. And again, there's a century of science fiction that we can draw from, and it's all PhD level, right? Arthur C. Clarke and all those folks, those were doctors. They were looking at it and saying, okay, based on our scientific knowledge, this is what's out there, things like that, as well as the SETI project. SETI is doing real work. It's, they tend to poo-poo UAP, but I think that there's an overlap. And I think that people like Avi Loeb are kind of in that overlap area. So for me, that's an area that's really exciting, because it seems like it's okay. Now that we've accepted that UAP are real, what does that mean? And where does that take us? And it seems like that's one of the directions that it may take us.
Yeah, completely agree. Superb. Okay, Tim, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Wonderful. Have a
Take care,
great
Tim.
Halloween.